days. At this time, I'd like to welcome our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Dan Sandor. Dr. Sandor joined the Virginia Tech Turf Grass Science faculty as Assistant Professor of Turf Grass Science in December of 2019. Dr. Sandor will take a lead role in enhancing curricula, developing an outstanding turf grass teaching program, and expanding the visibility of Virginia Tech's Turf Grass Science program. He will establish new courses and learning initiatives, and also will develop online educational coursework in collaboration with other Virginia Tech faculty and staff. Dr. Sandor, it's nice to have you here today with us, and the program is yours.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction, Ed, and thank all of you for being here today. So I'm excited to talk about some public perceptions of lawns and of turf management. I know this is a kind of a somewhat polarizing topic among master gardeners. There are many mixed opinions when it comes to lawns and turf grasses. So you may be surprised at some of the other research that's been done out there in other universities and across the nation in terms of, what exactly are consumers' opinions of lawns, of turf, should we have them, are they bad for the environment? So to get started today, I actually want to start with an activity and ask you guys your thoughts on lawns. So with that, I'm going to open up a Zoom poll and have you guys fill out, take a few minutes here to fill out this poll. So let me pull it up here and we will launch the poll. So go ahead and take about a minute to fill out the poll. And while you do that, I will share this picture of lawns with you. As you can see in these photos, there are many different types of lawns that you see, and I'm certainly not advocating for a 100% turf grass landscape. I am a fan of the picture on the top left of the one with a number of landscape plants, flowers, bedding plants, shrubs, and trees. But of course, there's certainly nothing wrong with the lawn directly below it. It's just a lawn that's gone dormant over the winter time. It still have some bedding plants and some landscape beds.
So Dan, looks like we're having some problems with the poll being administered. Attendees aren't able to see it. Somebody just click on one option.
Okay, that's fine. We can end the polling, and
there are a couple people that are now starting to vote. I don't know what.
Okay, yeah, I see some responses coming in.
Yep, now we see some responses coming in.
All right, well,
there was a question of if it's in the chat. No, it's not in the chat. He launched a separate window for polls, and maybe if you've clicked on the screen, it put the poll behind your Zoom room, maybe. Now responses are rolling in.
I think it's in a separate window on your screen, so you may have to move some screens around. So, all right, there are a number of questions. Feel free to not just the first thing that comes to your mind. Well, this isn't a scientific poll. There's not a paper that's coming out of this or anything. It's just what is your first opinion to each of these questions, and we'll kind of go through them here in a minute. But keep on answering those questions. I see a lot of responses coming in. We see in the top center picture, that's a lawn that, this is oyster grass lawn. It's gone dormant, but yet it looks beautiful. There's a number of other plants in the area, in the landscape. At the bottom, another lawn, nice green landscape to accent the house in that neighborhood. A buffalo grass lawn on the top right photo, a lot higher height of cut than maybe what we're used to in most situations, but a nice green color, low maintenance grass. And then on the bottom right, a lawn that's kind of in the shade a little bit. You can see it's not as green, but it's still pretty healthy for the most part. So, all right, well, let's go through these questions here. And looks like we spent about 3 minutes on this. So for now, we'll end the polling on this one here. And then we'll share the results. So you should be able to see the results on your screen. So the first, survey question was, lawns are harmful for the environment. Overall, about half of you disagree, which I am very pleased to see that answer. But a lot of folks, a lot of master gardeners and just homeowners in general, people who are concerned about the environment, they maybe think that they are harmful just because of, the perceived number of inputs and time and labor required to make them look nice. But it's actually not as many inputs and things that are involved as maybe most people believe. Lawns are harmful for public health. So a majority of folks either strongly disagreed or disagreed with that opinion. So that's good to see. About lawn pesticides are harmful for the environment. Okay, well, here's where we have some mixed opinions here. Majority don't really have an opinion, and then the other part of the majority strongly agree that they are harmful to the environment. And we have some other, it seems like a majority agree or strongly agree that they are harmful. So lawn pesticides are harmful to public health. Again, a majority, 32 and 23%, so about 12 of the folks here today believe they are harmful to public health. So lawn fertilizers, so we talked about lawn pesticides there, so that would include your herbicides, your fungicides, insecticides. So lawn fertilizers, so are they harmful to the environment? The neutral, either disagree or disagree, so we're kind of in the middle still there, among the majority with 32% on each end and then about 23% in the middle there. Lawn fertilizers are harmful to public health. Majority of the attendees today, they agree, while some are neutral and some disagree. All right, so here's one looking at lawn perceptions and behaviors, or lawn perceptions and beliefs. It's important to me what my neighbors think of my lawn. So 36% of the folks here today think this is important. 27 to about 6 to 5 to about 13 of you don't really have an opinion or disagree that it's important what the neighbors think. I make decisions for my lawn based off my neighbors' lawn care practices. I do as my neighbors do. Majority of us do not do that. About half of the folks here today do not make that decision. So that's good. I use my lawn primarily and I just had some different options out there. So nobody picked others, so that's good. If you did have something maybe other than these, that's certainly fine. But a majority of them use it as a place to observe nature or a place of beauty, so more of an aesthetic or wildlife habitat. Very small percentage for recreation and socialization. All right, and I know what turfgrass species are present in my lawn. Wow, 82% of you already know that, so that's good. 18% do not know, so that's fine. We have a lot of resources to share today to help you identify the lawn things. All right, I have one more poll to ask you. We didn't have enough room to put all the questions in the first poll, so there's just, I think, about 8 more questions just to look through and answer. So go ahead and check your windows again. That poll is 5. And I just have some general lawn management practices for you, questions for you as we get started today. And then I promise we'll be done with the polling. If this had been done in person, we would have had a much more better environment to foster our discussion today to where you and I could interact in person. Because we're here virtually this morning or this afternoon, we'll continue with this last poll here. So go ahead and take a few minutes to answer those. There should be about 6 questions there. So, and again, just whatever Don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about them, just whatever first comes to your mind, or especially on question number 3 there, just it's perfectly all right to say, I don't know. So, we'll spend about maybe 20 more seconds answering the second poll here, and we'll share the results. All right. So let's look at the results. So the grasses in my lawn, so kind of feeding off the previous question about knowing which species you have. The grasses in my lawn are predominantly cool seeds, or the majority of you picked cooling grass, so like your fescues, bluegrasses, some ryegrass per se. And then about a smaller percentage has warm season grasses, and then there were some who did not know, which is perfectly fine. I believe a majority of homeowners are not aware of what grasses they have in their lawn. At what height do you mow your lawn? I mow my lawn, and the majority said greater than or equal to 3 inches, so over half. So that's good. I encourage mowing high. I'm really pleased to see that nobody answered less than or equal to an inch. So that's pretty darn short. But it's good to see that we're practicing high mowing heights here in Virginia. The upper 6 inches of my soil is predominantly composed of a mixture between loam and clay, so more of our medium to fine textured soils here in Virginia. So that's good. A small percentage has sandy soils. Excellent. I have conducted a soil test for my lawn within the past 18 months, the last year and a half. So going back to maybe last spring or last January. So about half, 56 to 44, yes and no. So that's a very important thing for lawn management. We're talking about lawn care practices and opinions, because especially when it comes to fertilizing, a soil tells us a number of different things for fertilizer management, and also for water and irrigation practices as well, when we get into looking at textural analysis and organic matter analysis. I fertilize my lawn, number 5, what time of year? So majority spring and fall. So that's good. I would assume that also coincides with the majority of folks here who have cool season grasses. So that's the perfect time of year to fertilize the lawn for those types of grasses. So I'm glad nobody said spring, summer, and fall. That's quite a lot of fertilizer, in my opinion. So, and then some said, I do not fertilize my lawn. So, which that's perfectly fine. You may not need to, depending on your soil nutrient availability. And then I know how much water my lawn needs during the summer. A majority of you said yes, 70% said yes, and about 30% said no. So, all right, so that's good. So we got some baseline, we got some, just some icebreakers here, just thinking about lawn care practices and, how are we here in Virginia caring for our lawns? How do we make those decisions? Is it because of the knowledge we already have? Is it because of our neighbors? Is it because I think something is harmful to the environment or not? So as we continue today, let's get into some of these lawn behaviors and beliefs and preferences. And we're just going to take a few minutes this morning to look at a number of different studies and research results, and we'll kind of segmented these into various sections. So we'll take a break in between the sections to answer any questions that you folks may have today. So there was a study put out in Minnesota about 20 years ago looking at lawn care practices and consumer opinions of the lawn's environmental impact. And the majority of them, similar to the questions that we asked already today, they believe that fertilizers and pesticides were harmful to the environment and public health. But the government has a right to impose different laws and legislation to regulate the use of fertilizer and pesticides. Now, that was in 1999 was the year the study was actually conducted, and the data was published in 2001 by Dr. Meyer and her colleagues. And since that time, we know a number of states, Minnesota, Virginia, have constructed or have enacted fertilizer legislations, fertilizer laws, banning the use of phosphorus fertilizers. or strictly regulating the use of those under given conditions. And then also some cities across the United States and many states, in fact, enforce, you know, EPA laws and who can apply certain pesticides, you know, how they're labeled, how they're registered for use in certain situations. So, you know, we see that government intervention there. And then the other point that they found from that study was that, you know, a majority of them, 79%, disagreed or strongly disagreed that the lawn was harmful to the environment itself. So this is the lawn, not the pesticides, not the products, but the lawns itself, the turf grasses in the lawn itself. Believe that, so majority disagree that those were actually harmful to the environment. That they believe that they could make their difference on the environment, a positive contribution to the environment based upon how they, as a homeowner, as a consumer, manage their lawns. So a second study, and I think this is out of Michigan, out of suburban Detroit, they looked at how do homeowners perceive the attractiveness of their front yard, and you know, how attractive is their front yard, and how does that compare with that of their neighbor's yard, and the appearance of their neighbor's lawn. So these cultural norms conforming to neighborhood preference are more powerful than cultural norms framing conventional landscapes. So what that basically means, or what they saw, was that, you know, what happened in the neighborhood was a more significant influence than their lawn care practices than just somebody deciding, oh, I need my lawn to look green, it needs to have turf, it needs to have maybe the landscape overall needs to have a different mix of plants. Instead of having that conventional or traditional mindset, it was actually the impact of the neighborhood that they were living in that really drove their lawn and landscape behaviors. The other thing they discovered was that the environmentally beneficial changes in the residential landscapes, they were more successfully implemented at a neighborhood scale. So for you as master gardeners, when you are intervening with or educating with homeowners, consumers, other folks, you know, they saw, and we'll see this in a few other papers later today, that interaction on a neighborhood scale instead of an individual scale actually proves more valuable or more beneficial in terms of that type of intervention when it comes to, let's say, after the discussion today, or if you listened to Dr. Goatley's presentation yesterday on warm season grasses, you know, interacting on a neighborhood scale, on a community education approach has proven to be more effective at fostering change than just individual one-on-one discussions or educations. Another study out of Ohio by Blaine and his colleagues, they looked at lawns and they asked the opinions. This is similar to what I asked earlier today in our poll this afternoon, is what do you use your lawn for? What is it important? Why is it important to you? And this is the results of that poll, similar to what we saw in our poll this morning. So lawns were an extremely important part of outdoor residential environment to observe nature or wildlife, to socialize, and as a place of beauty and recreation. And then the second question, let me get back to that poll there. So this is that poll there. So very important in all four phases and all of those respondents. So out of the 432 respondents, thought that, you know, almost 70 to 80% were either of those categories. So the second question that they had asked their survey attendees were, why do homeowners keep the lawn as opposed to replacing it with a different ground cover, other than turf grasses? And so this is on the y-axis, the percentage of respondents, on the x-axis, their answers, whether they agreed, disagreed, or did not know in terms of why they managed the lawn the way they did. And the majority of them overall said it just fits into the look of the neighborhood. And then the second most answer was that they keep it that way because it's easier to care for than maybe alternative ground covers and alternative plants. And then the third option that they agreed with was that it was too expensive to replace. So we see a variance in response in terms of how the neighborhood relationships and status of lawns can play a significant role in the lawn care practices. And one of the things that creates a barrier to change that we see from that studies is that You know, in order to have a more creative lawn or a non-traditional lawn, maybe you're using low impact grasses or, you know, reducing the amount of turf grass in your lawn, not getting rid of it entirely, but maybe incorporating some other types of conservation friendly ground covers and other plants, is that this neighborhood aesthetic, people are really influenced by it. It creates a barrier to that, establishing that creativity innovation, as homeowners really desire that same look, that homogeneity among themselves in the neighborhood. So another study looked at in Minnesota how irrigation restrictions and weed or mowing height regulations, how are those affecting the beliefs or the norms of these homeowners? So in the Twin Cities there in Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota, they have a lot of irrigation restrictions or set irrigation restrictions and grass side ordinances just like normal. But there is really no quote unquote lawn police that comes out. There's nobody riding around on a squad car making sure that, you know, everybody's conforming. Most of these complaints or citations or fines are relied upon by neighbors calling on neighbors. And then they would get a hold of, you know, somebody from the city government or the, you know, the city planner's office and go out and talk with that homeowner. Generally, it's either a warning or they try to figure out why the home hasn't been, you know, managed correctly. Sometimes it can lead to a fine. I didn't really discuss it here today or share it here today, but there's been other research looking at specifically irrigation restrictions and how the fines for overwatering or having a lawn too high generally aren't enough to make any significant change. If they can afford to overwater, they're just going to continue doing it whether they get fined or not. So, but generally these enforcement policies have been because a neighbor called on a neighbor. And so another thing to think about with these formal policies is that, you know, they do need to change in the future. If we think about using more native grasses or low impact grasses that could be mowed higher, at higher heights of cut that may look higher than they really are, or they grow to a certain height like pine fescues and then they fall over to create this meadow or pastoral look to them. And also with irrigation practices as well, you know, in Minnesota, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, they have a irrigation ordinance that requires you to only water on odd or even days. Well, lawns don't really need to be watered every single odd day of the month. So that's 15 out of 30 days a month. So in reality, while that ordinance is an attempt to save water and be conservation friendly, it's actually doing a disservice to the health of the lawn. It's having a negative impact. And so therefore our lawns end up looking worse and worse because we're overwatering them as well. And so these grass height ordinances, they are mainly tied to, you know, what the neighborhoods, what the public wants in their neighborhoods, these social norms. But the lawn irrigation restrictions are trying to save this public resource or conserve this public resource, whereas it goes against what many people believe their lawn needs in a certain neighborhood. So one of the things I learned when I worked up in Minnesota as a postdoc was that, and I'm not sure if this is true here in Virginia and cities that may have irrigation restrictions, that they're actually saving this water, not necessarily just for the sake of conserving it or having a water shortage, but it's actually so that we have enough water in case there's a significant fire. We have these irrigation restrictions so that everybody's not using water on the same day. That way, if there is a significant fire outbreak or fire hazard, that our city utilities have enough water to put out a dangerous fire. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit of information. Was talking to city officials there. They really weren't looking at it from a resource conserving thing from household to household or a utility level thing. So another study out of Oklahoma City area, they looked at how homeowners, based upon their demographics, what are their preferences for grasses that may require less fertilizer or less water, less mowing, and then also grasses that do well, such as grasses that are marketed as or have been identified as being more drought tolerant or being more disease tolerant. And so they identified that demographics plays a really big role in terms of lawn practices and lawn behaviors. So willing hobby gardeners and reluctant mature homeowners. This is the words of the authors of the study. These are not my words, they're my categories. But basically the willing hobby gardeners, they're more younger, less than 45 years old, and they're more willing adopters of improved turfgrass cultivars. So these are folks that would go to a home and garden show perhaps, and then they'd see the latest and greatest in maybe turfgrass science, maybe new cultivars, maybe new products like a soil moisture sensor for the sprinkler system. And they would be more willing adopters of those types of things. And they would be willing to pay more for turf grasses that have a greater drought tolerance, or a lower fertilizer requirement. Whereas reluctant mature homeowners, they were greater than 45 years of age, and they were more reluctant to adopt improved turf grass varieties, to change out their lawn to utilizing more drought tolerant turf grasses, or using grasses that require less fertilizer, or mowing their lawn higher, or other practices as well. So just something to keep in mind as you're discussing things in your community with your neighbors and people in your community, and thinking about those approaches and what the research has shown in terms of barriers of adoption just between potential demographics. So we'll go ahead and take a pause here, and if there's any questions regarding lawn preferences or behaviors, we'll go there before we start talking about a little bit of benefits of turf.
Oh, we did have one comment come in after the survey when you asked for if people grew warm season, cool season, or didn't know what type of grass. Suggestion was that you add another one for people that grow both cool and warm season by choice, because there are some in Southern Virginia that do have that combination.
Yeah, well, great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That's certainly a challenge, especially depending on what type of warm season grass it is. A lot of times they're more aggressive than our cool season grasses, so they often overtake it over time. But hey, if you're doing that, that is fantastic. You get green all year round, hopefully. So best of luck to whoever that is. And certainly something to consider in the future and future polls. But a lot of homeowners may not even know if they have. I'm willing to bet a majority of them don't know whether they have both or not. But hey, that's awesome if you are doing that. So any other questions?
None other have popped up.
All right.
At this time.
So with that in mind, we'll move on to talking about maybe some benefits of turf, maybe some things that you haven't considered or heard of or realized. And I've linked a number of studies here with these benefits. So there are three main categories over time with the 4 studies there at the bottom. Some of these are reviews of multiple studies, and we categorize our benefits of turf grasses into 3 different groups based upon what type of benefit that they provide. So a lot of people don't like lawns, or they're confused about them. We just saw they have different preferences or beliefs or behaviors towards their lawn practices based upon their demographics, based upon their neighborhood, based upon what they think their neighbors want, based upon what they use their lawn for, whether it's recreation, whether it's aesthetics, whether it's a wildlife habitat. And so the main thing that a lot of folks aren't aware of is that lawns are actually really good for the environment. And I think the majority of you from our poll this morning believe that as well. And these are just a small list of things that there's much more information in those papers below. And I do have a list of references at the very end of this slide. So when you download it, either later today or on the Canvas site, you can go back and download those papers. You can look those up and download those and read them on your own to read more about these. But grasses are great at sequestering carbon, capturing carbon. They use that energy for photosynthesis and other processes. Bioremediation, basically improving our soil health, improving our water quality as it filters through the soil, and capturing other pollutants in the soil. Modifying the temperature of surfaces and buildings by just cooling the surface and cooling the area. Erosion control. If you've ever driven across a place with new construction or passed by something that doesn't have a lot of grasses, a property or something. It's just completely just mud and rock and stone. I mean, it's pretty soon going to be washed away with there not being any grasses there. Improving the air quality, there's been a number of studies looking at that where they've gone and removed grasses, especially overseas in areas and countries like China and other East Asian countries where they've reduced the amount of turf grasses due to urbanization and population growth, much more increased air pollution, dust and everything, because there's less green surfaces there. And then also reducing runoff. We see here in this picture at a golf course, we see, the closer it gets to that water source, the higher we're mowing that grass to, help reduce and limit any runoff. One of the other ones that's kind of fairly obvious to most folks is the aesthetic value of grasses. Here we have a picture along a roadside boulevard of just grasses, again, complementing the landscape between that home and the public road surfaces here. There's a number of aesthetic values, such as visual quality, increasing our property values. There's been a number of studies looking at mental health and in hospitals and mental hospitals and schools and colleges and universities, just the overall ability to go outside and lay on the grass has demonstrated a positive contribution to somebody's way of living or mental health or positive outlook on life in those areas. And also improving social harmony, community pride, again, fostering those good relationships in the neighborhood. The last category is just the recreational benefit of turf. So just a low cost surface overall. Imagine not having a lawn or playing, having an event on a ground cover or something like that. That wouldn't feel very good. It wouldn't be good for the plants either if we were just having recreation on those types of things that may not recover as well. The overall physical health, safety for athletes, which is a big thing if you're a sports fan. You see this coming up a lot recently with concussions and concerns for their athletes, not only just professional athletes, but also for young kids and youth leagues as well. So just a number of benefits. There's more here on this word cloud that's been put together by the Lawn Care Institute and their partners. So just, again, an exciting thing to share with your community, with your neighbors, with your friends. Next time you hear maybe somebody thinking negatively about turf grasses and about lawns, think about these benefits, be able to share these with your friends, with your community members, and educate them. Again, thinking about that neighborhood scale and all the many things that a lawn does provide. Again, we're not advocating for 100% turf grasses in the lawn, but you don't need to eliminate your lawn either. You need to keep, some lawn there in order to derive these benefits and much more at your property. All right, so I see we got a question. So before we move on to how we get our lawn care information, we'll go ahead and what's our question now?
Bill says we have turf owners with zoysia in one area and fine fescue in shady areas. I have a test area of St. Augustine and a sunny area, but 90% is a mix of cool season fescues. So FYI, many of our turf areas are 1 acre or better. So I guess Bill was, I think, adding some more information to his previous comment about the poll question.
Okay. All right.
So I think you made a good point with your last slide talking about different uses for turf, and I think if you go to a outdoor event and if the lawn's full of dandelions and clover, how many people are not apt to want to go because they have a bee allergy, and they'd be afraid that they're going to be stung by bees constantly. So it does have that lawn concert picture there made me think of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of research done by some of my friends and colleagues, and up in Minnesota. I don't know if we talked about this at the beginning. Before I came here to Virginia Tech, I worked up as a postdoc in Minnesota, so that's kind of why I keep on referencing them a lot. But otherwise, bee lawns are really big up in Minnesota. A group up there that's doing a lot of research, and certainly, a bee lawn is composed of clover, but it's also composed of grasses and turf grasses that we use, like fescues and bluegrasses as well. Talk a little bit more about that later today, but yeah, there's just a lot of things that folks don't think about. Imagine if you did take the turf away, what else would be there? and what would change in our society and in our environment. So let's look at, where are consumers getting their information, and what do they find most useful, and maybe what's more trustworthy. So this is a study that was put out again in Minnesota back about 10 years ago in 2010, and they looked at, how is information being exchanged among homeowners regarding lawn care practices. So about a third of them discussed yard or lawn information with their neighbors. That even maybe more now that everybody's staying home due to the pandemic, especially during the spring and early summer periods. Most of the information that homeowners share or that is obtained is from these face-to-face discussions and not simply from reading some type of educational content. So imagine if this talk today was just put out in a local magazine or local home and garden, press article, or I guess the Roanoke Times. I'm not super familiar with all of the newspapers here in Virginia yet, but that information wouldn't have been discussed or learned or practiced as much as compared to you today taking what you learned and actually discussing it with your neighbors and sharing that information. So that's just something to keep in mind as you as master gardeners go out and talk to your friends, talk to the people in the community, is that them reading something isn't as likely going to be disseminated as you sharing that with them and then them going off and sharing it with somebody else. Majority of topics that they saw that were discussed is just what you'd think, mowing height, mowing practices, and then also how to manage weeds and how to, manage putting out fertilizers. When is the time to do it? How much fertilizer should I put out? What are the types of fertilizer pros and cons and things like that. There's another study put out from the University of Minnesota a couple of years before that, just looking at, where do consumers go to get their yard and garden info. So this isn't just strictly related to the lawns, but everything within the landscape beds, ground covers, trees, lawns, turf grasses, and so forth. And they looked at, which topics are homeowners interested in, and should the universities, such as the University of Minnesota there, or in our case, Virginia Tech, and the VCE, how do they play a role? And do consumers, do they obtain the information, do they understand the information in different types of groups, whether it's individually or whether it's, again, on a neighborhood or a group scale? So what they saw was that homeowners that thought that highly illustrated publications were pretty valuable, and that the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, the big arboretum up there that has a number of extension agents that work there every day, were considered more trustworthy than going to a garden center or going to a home and garden box store like a Lowe's or Home Depot. But the information coming out of the university or at the site that had a majority of master gardeners and experts there, that information was more trustworthy and more reliable. However, what they saw though, what they also learned from the survey was that the majority of practical information was obtained from friends and from garden centers and from other points of purchase. So like the home box store and just reading the packages, the instructions off the directions. So I thought that was very interesting, the fact that while they put more trust and more reliability in the extension and in the experts, the actual usefulness of that information has been more useful. They get more use out of it, more practicality out of it from the garden centers, from friends, and from maybe the point of purchase, such as the packaging directions. So again, that's something to keep in mind as you as master gardeners, just becoming trained and more aware and up to date with whatever Dr. Goatley and his colleagues are putting out through VCE, and how you can also help provide not only as being trusted sources, but also providing more useful and practical information for that type of lawn care information. Another study was put out by Minnesota and also from Utah State University as well. Similar questions, but again, most of the trusted information came from university extension, garden centers, family members as well. But again, most of the useful information was from the garden centers and from families and even some from lawn care companies. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, sorry, is that the internet and books, so just like we talked about earlier, it's just reading content, manufactured websites themselves and other third-party sites were not very trustworthy. They're actually considered the least trustworthy and least useful sources of information for how to care for the lawn. And again, the study out of Utah saw that the internet, friends, and family, and the point of purchase themselves, whether they're at the store or interacting with the employee at the garden center, were more commonly used pathways to getting information about the lawn, about how to take care of it, or other areas of the yard and garden. Then recently, a study that was just completed last year looked at, what do consumers want in terms of how to pick the best grasses for their lawns, and what are they looking for? Are they looking for something like, say, Amazon, where you can just go and basically filter and sort exactly to what you want, or any other department store website? Maybe it's something like Ralph Lauren, where you go and you want to buy a sweater, but then you want it to be red, and you want it to have a certain type of material, a certain size. Our consumer is actually open and willing to utilize something like that, and because that's something that they need in terms of just switching to more low input or resource efficient grasses. And so they put out a survey asking that type of question, if they'd be interested in that. What are they looking for in that type of website or service, and what would they use it for? So the second bullet there, they want something. They want a database that helps them identify, which grasses, not only which grasses, but which varieties or which cultivars of grasses are best adapted for their environment and best tolerant of other environmental and abiotic stresses like drought tolerance or shade tolerance or heat tolerance, or up in Minnesota, cold tolerance or freezing tolerance. And they also desire more information on turfgrass mixtures and blends. So, when you go to the store, and, you're not just going to find one variety in that product in most cases. It's either going to be a blend, which is a product that has multiple cultivars of a single species. So it may have multiple tall fescue varieties in there, or it'll be a mixture, which will have, similar to somebody's comment earlier, it'll have maybe a Kentucky bluegrass and a tall fescue in it, or it'll have maybe some zoysia and sometimes maybe a Bermuda grass in it. So they want that type of information as well. And I will say that information is coming. It may be a couple years down the road, but I know some of the folks that are involved in working on that database. So I see we have a question here. So before we move on to research, advocacy, and outreach, we'll go ahead and take that question.
Yes, Dave had a question for you. I'm not sure if you've been in the state long enough to be able to answer this, but what differences do you find in lawns between Minnesota and Virginia?
All right, that's a good question. I haven't been out in the state that much, just because it was kind of during the winter. I moved here Thanksgiving weekend, and then the quarantine started in March, so I didn't get out too much in January and February. But I will say one difference that just from the way that things are laid out, and we'll look at it here in a few minutes, is that in Virginia we have both cool and warm season grasses. So Minnesota, you don't have very many warm season grasses, and if you do, they don't survive very long, very short growing season. But our warm season grasses here, like as mentioned, St. Augustine grass, zoysia grass, Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, and centipede grass. I'm not sure if that's something that's up here. And seashore paspalum, we don't have those grasses in Minnesota. Also in Minnesota, predominantly, Kentucky bluegrasses are the predominantly used turfgrass species in lawns. And compared to our fescues, the Kentucky bluegrass is actually very high input, very high maintenance compared to a tall fescue or even a fine fescue grass. So that was something that we saw a lot up there. I'm not sure in terms of the amount of Kentucky bluegrass to tall fescue or fine fescue here Virginia, and certainly not, and I certainly assume that there are way more warm season grass lawns here than in Minnesota. But good, great question. And hopefully get to get out.
What growing zones do you have represented in Minnesota?
In terms of the plant hardiness zones, or the
Yes.
I honestly don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I'll show a map here to maybe demonstrate maybe the point a little bit later from one of our turfgrass science textbooks to kind of demonstrate that. But I know I'm a bad scientist, not memorizing the numbers, but it's a fairly cool, colder climate, a little bit more humid as well. But we'll take a look at those in a minute. I see there's another question. Was that the other question?
No, that was my question, but
Okay.
Denise typed in, she said Minnesota is zone 3.
All right. Thank you, Denise, for helping me out there. So, all right, so we talked about sources of information. You know, where are homeowners, where are consumers getting their information from? What do they trust? You know, they trust the university and extension and the experts like you, and they're also finding the more useful information from their friends, from their neighbors, from the points of purchase, from the garden center, or the packaging directions. I just want to also just bring to the forefront of everybody's attention that the turfgrass industries are doing, especially within the past 5 or 6 years, a lot of work in really advocating for better information about lawns, about grasses, the benefits they provide, and also the responsible stewardship of, you know, turfgrass management practices. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, a lot of negativity and scrutiny towards like golf courses, towards sports fields, towards lawns in general. But a lot of these industries that work with those entities and those groups, they're involved in promoting a good environment, not just of turf, but also things such as pollinators, as we talked about earlier. Syngenta and Bayer are two of our biggest industries in turf. Not just in crop science and agronomic production, but also in more specialty crops like turf grasses, such as lawns, but also in golf and sports turf. And they also have these programs such as Operation Pollinator and the Bayer Feed a Bee project that reward golf courses for taking part in other societies, other groups, for taking part in these types of programs. And similar to what you have seen maybe in the Audubon Society and those groups as well. We also have other groups that have put out manuals, best management practices manuals. You can get this one there at the bottom of that link at ncipmc.org. And that looks at best management practices for, you know, bee lawns. I mentioned the University of Minnesota earlier. They do a lot. They have a bee lawn website. This is one of their signs that they have at the Minnesota Arboretum, where it talks about, you know, how to incorporate flowering plants that are attractive pollinators in your lawns. And a lot of groups, a lot of regional and surrounding states in Minnesota are trying to also encourage these as well. Golf course there, you see at the bottom right. I have a friend who did a study in Minnesota looking at the value of golf courses from an environmental and just a basic natural capital contribution in an environment like Minnesota. If you think about Minnesota, if you have time later today, if you zoom in to where the Twin Cities are and you put it on satellite mode, we'll just see a bunch of gray, a bunch of black, and, you know, where the asphalt is, where the buildings are, all the urbanized area. A place like the Twin Cities that has, you know, over 3 million people living in that population. As you zoom out, really the only green you see are those golf courses, that natural capital and the natural green that those golf courses and some parks provide. And what a lot of golf course superintendents across the nation are realizing is that, hey, we don't need to manage all of the golf course like a golf course. We can include some of these naturalized areas. We can include some of these pollinator habitats. And so the industry itself is doing a number of things within recent years and trends to advocate for more naturalized areas. Things such as, you know, establishing pollinator areas such as the milkweed habitat for monarchs and for other pollinators. This is something that was put out in a USGA article just last spring, and just looking at increasing the biodiversity of a golf course. And it's really good to see that these big time groups are doing these things and on a larger scale to also increase the awareness. Think about the number of weddings number of golfers, a number of other events that happen at these places. Furthermore, the industry itself, specifically the golf, which has the most money in the turfgrass industry, they're doing a number of things to, advocate for smarter management to reduce the amount of pesticides, reduce the amount of water, and other factors, other maintenance inputs that go into the ecosystem on a golf course, and also educating, their golfers, their members, the staff, everybody that interacts at the golf course in the new smarter ways that they're managing courses as well. So the USGA has done a really good job in working with these turfgrass professionals to advocate and to educate folks on not only the value of turfgrass ecosystems, but also what they're doing as an industry to be better stewards of the environment. One of the things that we talked about earlier is, this database, these sources of information. Okay, I see my golf course, or I see my local park is participating in Feed a Bee or participating in utilizing low input grasses, low maintenance grasses. But where do I get that information as a homeowner? Well, you can go to the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program website, ntep.org. This is basically what an NTEP trial looks like. It's just a bunch of blocks of grass, squares of grasses we have in here at Virginia Tech, at our research farm, and at other research stations. And this is basically what we do as turfgrass scientists. I know it looks like a rough job, but somebody's got to do it. But we take a lot of evaluations, and the different types of tests that we do, the drought tolerance, so it's just overall quality. Some of them we evaluate for their wear tolerance or traffic. We do some in the greenhouse here. This is Dr. Jim Barrett at the University of California, Riverside, and some of the grasses that he's evaluating. But right now, this data, one of the barriers to it is that this is what it looks like. So if you were to go on the NTEP website and you were to look at an NTEP trial, it's very hard for the average homeowner to just figure out what this data means. Right now, I've kind of helped us out a little by putting these headers in terms of the varieties, the species, the quality ratings. But an average homeowner is not going to understand what this means. And I guarantee a lot of this, even lawn and landscape professionals aren't aware of what these mean as well. So this is some of the data that's coming in that database to help the homeowner, help the consumer, and the turfgrass professional, find and identify and hopefully utilize more low input and environmentally friendly grasses in their lawns and in their landscapes. There's three other groups that I want to tell you about, and then we'll answer a couple of questions popping up here. Some of the questions that are going on. But Low Input Turf is a group out of Minnesota that's looking at grasses that use less mowing, less watering, less fertilizers. You can read more about their research and the resources they have there. The Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance is a group that I've worked closely with, and this is a group that's solely looking at grasses that need less water, which is perfect here in the transition zone, as we sometimes get some hotter periods during the summer that may have some drought. Which grasses can still maintain their green cover and provide a nice quality appearance or desired appearance in the lawn. And then the A list is the Alliance for Low Input Sustainable Turf Grasses. It does similar things to what the previous two groups do, just kind of a mixture of different things, not just water, but also fertilizer and mowing as well. But one of the things that's really neat is that these are becoming more widely accepted and popularized just in local home and garden stores. When I moved to Minnesota, the house that I moved into, I was kind of curious of, what options were there for me to, do something on my yard. And I happened to be in Lowe's in South St. Paul, and I just happened to pick up a bag of seed. So I was walking through the aisle and just started looking at it. This is a blend of perennial ryegrasses. And I saw that this actually the grasses in this product had been evaluated by the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance. It's an independent research organization or group, as being very drought tolerant. So I knew that if I picked this product, this blend of perennial ryegrasses, that they would be very drought tolerant and very need less water than maybe a different product that had other perennial ryegrasses in it. So again, those are just a few different examples that we've talked about, that we've shared, that look at how the industry is trying to help consumers, help turfgrass professionals, help master gardeners, not only implement, grasses in terms of grass or bee lawn habitats or monarch habitats, but also do their part in advocating for smarter management or best management practices and reducing our inputs. So a couple of inputs we'll talk about specifically are fertilizing and watering. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and answer a couple of questions at this time. So go ahead, Ed.
Yes, Diane wants to know when you, in those studies that you referenced, if there was an explanation why university/extension sources were considered trustworthy but not useful.
So that's a good question. So the question was, what's an explanation of why were they trustworthy and considered trustworthy but not useful? I know in a few of the papers, the comments just seem to be that maybe they were either too technical of instructions, or it was just easier or more reliable to have that face-to-face discussion as opposed to reading something from a university extension website or a page. And some of these were done, some of those papers, they were done in the early 2000s or even the mid 2000s. So a lot has changed in terms of how university extension disseminates information now. So, it may be time to update or to redo some of those studies or see what's happened over the years. But, I know one of those studies was done in 1999. So we didn't even have, a lot of people didn't even have the internet or access to high-speed, reliable internet then. So, that could have been a big limitation as opposed to just going out and talking to somebody at a garden center or in their neighborhood. So that's a good question. Is there any other questions?
No, that was it. There were two with the same thing.
All right, perfect. Yeah, and times have certainly changed in terms of how extension can get their information out. But it's also important for you as master gardeners to use the knowledge that you learned from this weekend at the Master Gardener College to be that expert in your area. And, as people have seen, to learn more from that interaction as opposed to reading, that can go a long way, because not only will you seem trustworthy, but you can also be more useful in your community. So let's talk about two main practices. There are two big inputs that has had a lot of information, a lot of research conducted on them in terms of how people care for their lawn and why they care for them maybe in certain ways. Why do they fertilize or why do they water? There was a study that was done in California looking at lawn fertilizing behaviors. And if a homeowner, wants to water or wants to fertilize their lawn, what is affecting them in making that decision? So homeowners there, and I can't remember which part of California this was, but they placed a really high importance on their lawn care. Those who placed a really high importance tend to live in more expensive homes, and they fertilized at higher rates compared to folks who placed a lower value and lived in cheaper homes. That kind of makes some obvious sense. It kind of seems fairly obvious to most of us. But one of the other things that they saw was that homeowners associations were a really big proponent of why these lawns were being fertilized at such high rates and other lawn care behaviors. Homeowners who belonged to the HOAs applied fertilizers at higher rates than those who didn't. A lot of this is because of pressure, not simply from neighbors, but just from the home HOAs themselves. And one of the other things that they saw was that the importance of lawn care really didn't vary across different kinds of households or neighborhoods. So the importance of lawn care, as it being an important part of being a homeowner, was actually produced through social relations and interactions between neighbors and also these neighborhood institutions such as homeowners associations. And it's funny, I remember reading an article when I was in grad school, probably about 5 years ago, when California was going through a really big drought. Homeowners were deciding whether or not to water their lawn or to conserve water. There's a lot of pressure on homeowners to save water. And a number of them in California decided, well, I'm just not going to water my lawn because I want to save water. And, I'll let it go dormant. I'll let it have that brown or tan or gold effect color to it because I want to save water and not get fined for overwatering or using too much water. The homeowners associations didn't like that very much. So they actually got fined for not watering. They got fined for letting their lawn go brown for the homeowners association. And so they're kind of in a battle in their wallet in terms of, do I use water or do I let my lawn go brown and get fined by the homeowners association? So again, just a number of issues that homeowners associations produce on the homeowner, on the property manager, in terms of fertilizing and watering. Another study in, I think, Baltimore, Maryland area, they looked at how, you know, what are the benefits, well, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, what are the perceived landscape benefits of your lawn or of your home landscape that drive, you know, your irrigation and fertilizer behaviors. And so these are the benefits that they listed on the right. There's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of perceived landscape benefits, and they kind of gave a category or description to each of those different benefits. And so, you know, which of these benefits really drove the lawn behaviors regarding watering and fertilizing. So residents who believed that their landscape or thought their landscape provided monetary benefits were actually the least likely to engage in good irrigation and fertilizer behaviors. They thought that, you know, the more that I can get out in terms of property values and things like that, and my return on my investment, they're actually not going to be very good stewards in terms of engaging in best management practices for fertilization of their lawn. Whereas homeowners who perceived that aesthetics was the most valued landscape benefit out of all the homeowners was aesthetics, it was also not very influential on their landscape practices because the majority of them actually believed that environmental benefits, as you see there, the second one, and also the environmental benefits were the most influential on their landscape behaviors. And so breaking this down, I know it's on the slide, but in the paper, they also discussed, and in the study, they also saw that those who engaged in good irrigation practices thought that all these were more important, all the benefits were important except for the monetary and the aesthetic benefits. That means that they're okay with letting their lawn be a little less aesthetic, and that means that they are saving water. And then also with the fertilizer one, those who practice good fertilizer habits or practices, behaviors, they thought that all of those benefits were good towards their landscape, except for the health and comfort, and again, the monetary ones. So some of those thought that maybe the fertilizer practices were negative on the health, maybe it's pets, maybe it's children, or runoff into water, sources of water as well. And this is a really big study across nationwide. Almost 500,000 people, over 500 people at least, participated in this study. So it was really interesting to see, you know, what were these factors that drove people into making the decisions regarding water and fertilizer. Lately, the EPA has made some progress or made some efforts to talk more about outdoor water use. And we've had EPA water sense programs for a lot of indoor things like sinks and dishwashers and refrigerators, clothes washers, and other indoor appliances. But now it's becoming more focused also towards outdoor water use as well. There are 3 studies that were done across 3 different years in Kansas, in big metropolitan areas, the state of Kansas, and looking at, you know, watering behaviors by one of my colleagues, Dr. Dale Bremer, and his group out there. And they looked at homeowners that have automated irrigation systems, and, you know, how are they watering? What are their practices? What are their behaviors? Those with automated irrigation systems watered much more frequently than those who either watered manually, like with a hose, or some type of above ground system. They apply water at unknown volumes. When asked if they knew how much water they apply, they often practice a set and forget mindset, which basically means that they set it in the spring and it just stays that way throughout the whole entire season. These are some of the statistics that came out of those 3 studies as well, across the different studies, looking at, you know, the various percentages of homeowners and their irrigation practices. And so majority of them thought, almost half thought that it is important that their lawn look green all the time. Majority didn't really know how much lawn their water requires, how much water their lawn require. I think here, and I studied this earlier today, a majority of you did know at least how much water you were putting out. Over 70% of them didn't know how much water they applied in a single irrigation event, and a majority of them did, though, rank water conservation as equally important to, saving other things such as fertilizers or mowing practices as well. And this is also repeated by a group out in California, the University of California Cooperative Extension. And they looked at investigating in how irrigation and lawn watering best management practices would be perceived, or how well adopted they would be in terms of aesthetic norms or aesthetic beliefs in lawns and in neighborhoods, and, in terms of their willingness to adopt drought-tolerant turf varieties, whether they would really believe that, it's okay to have you let your lawn go brown a little bit, or their willingness to raise their mowing height in their lawn as opposed to mowing it at the same height, or even converting from cool season to warm season grasses. I know Dr. Goatley talked about that a little bit yesterday, and how a lot of homeowners here in Virginia are a little bit reluctant to switch to grasses that survive or do better in the summer, a lot of our warm season grasses. And so these are kind of some of the things that they found out there in that study in California. And this is another study, a nationwide study done by Sue and his colleagues, I think out of Utah State. And a lot of the things that these two studies found is that while that consumers are knowledgeable about best management practices for their lawn, some of them may not be willing to do that if it means sacrificing their lawn quality. And so one of the things that has to happen is that we have to set these new standards. We have to say that, hey, it is okay to let your lawn grow brown a little bit during the summer, or it is okay to have a dormant lawn in the wintertime if it means saving more water during the summer by having a warm season grass. And also just being more informed about newer irrigation technologies, newer irrigation practices and watering practices as well. Because homeowners, while they believe that water conservation is a significant and important thing, there are a lot of barriers to adoption when it comes to these types of things. I will say, and you see here on the graphic here, this is put out by the Irrigation Association, and next month is Smart Irrigation Month. So if you go to the Irrigation Association website, you can find a lot more infographics like this and other resources to utilize and to share with members in your community and help advocate for folks using the water more wisely in their landscape. So we're going to switch now to low maintenance lawns. We'll talk about, we talked about letting our lawn go dormant or maybe switching out to more low maintenance grasses. Talk about two big inputs just now, watering and fertilizing. So we'll take a break if there are any questions regarding those. I don't see any.
No, I don't have any in the question and answer box.
All right, we'll keep on trucking along then. So, how willing are homeowners to adopt to these low maintenance lawns then? If they're willing to change these standards, they believe water conservation is important. If, they're affected by their homeowners association where they want to save water, but then the homeowners association fines them for utilizing inputs such as water or fertilizer, are they willing to adopt, grasses that need less inputs, maybe need less mowing, maybe need less water or less fertilizers. There's a study put out by a group in Oklahoma City, again, looking at warm season grasses, and that they saw that homeowners, they're willing to pay for grasses that require less input. They really appreciate the low value, the low maintenance attributes of various warm season grasses, whether it be less water, less fertilizer, less pesticide use, or less mowing as well. And also by other traits of these grasses, such as their improved drought tolerance, and then also their shade tolerance, and then their purchasing price. So a lot of these grasses, warm season grasses, can actually be established as sods. So they may be a little bit more expensive than just going out and buying a bag of seed. But they also establish a lot more quicker as well. There was another study, a follow-up study in Minnesota and in New Jersey, looking at the consumers, not consumers, but public land managers' willingness to adopt these low maintenance grasses. So these are people who manage more commercial lawns, commercial areas in their communities. And what do they think in terms of adopting or switching out these public areas to more low maintenance grasses? So think about those pictures we showed earlier with the people on the park, or at a concert, or at a big open area. And this is a quote directly from that paper, in which they saw that they are more adaptable to more sustainable vegetation, and they're interested, they're more supportive of any types of efforts that shift from using traditional grasses to more low input grasses. And this column here that I've highlighted here in yellow, this is the value, this is the number that we're looking at when it comes to switching to these beliefs of these public land managers, again, in the state of Minnesota and in the state of New Jersey, and whether they agreed or disagreed. One would be disagreed and or strongly disagreed, and on the right-hand side of those columns, the max would be strongly agree. You can see those ratings there, and they're basically in the middle between all those ratings, and especially there at the bottom one, the last one. How supportive would you be of your city converting public turfgrass areas to low input grass? So that was actually ranked on a 1 to 5 scale. We see there in the last two columns, and almost 4, so almost 80%. Of the public land managers thought that their city would be supportive of that switch and of that transition. And then a couple other studies put out by the University of Minnesota, they looked at how are these maintenance attributes, these low inputs of these maintenance requirements of low input grasses, how would they be perceived by consumers? And it really significantly impacts consumer demand, and also the purchasing decisions by these homeowners. These grasses, while they may be low input, they may also have some different purchasing prices as they're not as widely available. For instance, pine fescue is a very low input grass, one we'll talk about here in a minute, but it's also not as widely available as sod right now. And that's what a lot of homeowners prefer, is that instant lawn from sodding. So you may have to pay a little bit. Low input characteristics were also as equally important as aesthetics. So not just driven by a quality aspect, but also just by the maintenance aspect. And they also thought that aesthetics and the maintenance attributes, the maintenance requirements, were more important than whether the turf grass was native to the United States or not. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of concern about lawns and about grasses, as many of them that we utilize in lawns are not native to the United States. Very few of them are. Most of them come from Europe or Asia, and some from Africa. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're invasive. They've actually become naturalized. And a lot of these cultivars, these improved cultivars and grasses, have become naturalized here in the United States, and they're not invasive per se. Another one of these studies looked at, based upon all of these low maintenance attributes or low inputs, these input requirements, what is the relative ranking of those? And majority of them thought that irrigation was the most desired low maintenance attribute, and then followed by mowing, and then by fertility. And that the motivations for reducing their inputs were mainly attributed to environmental concerns, so their impact on the environment. It wasn't necessarily that they were wanting to use these low input grasses because they were just trying to save money, but it was that these consumers were concerned about the environment and their impact of lawn management practices on the environment. Consumers also wanted, one of the things was that more shade adapted turf grasses and grasses that require less pesticide inputs, such as those for weed control, such as herbicides. We see a lot of that coming on the market today with a lot of weed and feed type of products. I'll just go ahead and say right now that if you are using a weed and feed product, or people that are, I'm not a big proponent of those. I think they're largely ineffective. based upon the time of year that those are often sold or marketed and put out. And so we see, with these low input grasses, low maintenance grasses, that maybe we don't need to do as much weed control in those types of situations as well. Maybe we'll stop using the weed and feed products. And then also, as we saw earlier on the slide, they do understand that their maintenance practices have a significant impact on the environment, and they are willing to purchase their low maintenance grasses, or these low input grasses. But right now, one of the biggest barriers is just the access to information and this education. So maybe next year at Master Gardener College, we can have a whole session on low input grasses. I do want to kind of transition though. We'll maybe do a little tease of it right now. Talk a little bit about some low maintenance or low input grasses for Virginia lawns. So these are ones that maybe you're already using or already familiar with. But in case you're not, we'll just discuss a few highlights. One of the things that's important to point out though, whenever we're talking about grasses and different species, is just recognizing where we live, where we are, really plays a significant role in terms of what grasses will perform best. So I think you may have heard me say the word transition zone a few times earlier. That's just this middle zone of the country you can see. And these are how we kind of identify grasses or refer to our grasses, is whether they're cool season, warm season, or their transitions. They can be utilized in the transition zone. So, years of study and research has kind of divided the country, and this is kind of what I was alluding to with not keeping up to date on my hardiness zones. But this is a map kind of identifying, and some of this has changed with our climate change concerns and our just the way the world is going. Our warmer grasses are moving more northward. That transition zone is moving more northward. But these are the grasses that are adapted to different parts of the country. This isn't an exhaustive list or an all-encompassing list in each of these groups, but these are ways that we identify different grasses. We can see there in Virginia alone, we have 3 different groups. We have semi-cool humid, humid transitional, and warm humid climates that all favor different grasses in these different areas. With cool season and warm season grasses, they have different life cycles or seasonal growing patterns or periods of active growth. And so we hear with cool season grasses, that would be our fescues or bluegrasses or ryegrasses. They're going to be actively growing the most in the spring and in the fall. So during the summertime, we don't need to be doing as much fertilizing and aggressively mowing shorter. That's the time when we want to lay off the fertilizer. We want to mow higher and want those grasses to survive during the summer. So a low input turf grass, a cool season turf grass, would be tall fescue. Tall fescue is really good. It's very shade tolerant. Does really well with being mowed high, with traffic as well. This picture at the bottom here, I just want to point out, I'm going to draw something. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here. Hopefully you will. I'm going to draw this arrow here, and let me actually clear it and draw it this way. So this grass here, my purple arrow is pointed to, this is Kentucky 31 tall fescue. This is a fescue that maybe you've heard of before or seen before. Say, ooh, I don't like tall fescue. It looks like that. That is a forage type tall fescue. That is something that you would have in a pasture or have in some other type of livestock field. But yeah, this is sold a lot, and this is often available as seed right next to the turf type tall fescues that you see in a lot of home and garden stores and garden centers, co-ops as well. So we want to stay away from that forage type tall fescue. We want to get one that's more in the foreground. Those are our turf type tall fescues. We have a picture there on the right as well showing it does really well in the shade. It's very low maintenance grass. Fine fescues are one that maybe you're not as familiar with here in Minnesota, or here in Virginia, excuse me. And these are becoming one of my favorite grasses, in which they can either be grown as no-mow grasses, or they're very fine textured. They grow to a certain height. They can either be there as a pastoral seed head kind of effect, and you see this a lot on roadsides and utility areas, but it can also be mowed as a home lot setting, as you see there on the bottom left. Here I am standing in the bottom center photo on top of the grasses that are in the photo right above it. above it. We also have grasses on the roadside and then boulevards as well. And getting back to our other idea of, or other concern of low input grasses and less herbicides and less fertilizers, our vine fescues have actually shown some activity to reduce crabgrass infestation, which I know is a really big concern among homeowners and turf people everywhere. You can see in the bottom right photo, those are all fine fescue plugs or groups. And we see on the outside around it, that's all crabgrass, but we don't see a lot of crabgrass within those clumps because of the natural weed suppression. So that's one benefit of fine fescues. I know we're running a little short on time. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna skip ahead and you can read the information. This is just some more follow-up information regarding tall and fine fescue. So warm season grasses. So I'll leave you with a couple species for low input warm season grasses. So they grow primarily during the summertime. So they're, they come out of dormancy in the spring. So temperatures warm up, soil temperatures warm up, and they're predominantly growing. So these are Bermuda grasses, zoysia grass, buffalo grass, centipede, St. Augustine, paspalum, bahia grass. So we had actually an article in our Virginia Turfgrass Journal last year looking at zoysia grasses, which are one of the grasses that are very low input for a warm season grass. Very well adapted to shade, unlike Bermuda grasses. It also has this nice gold color in the winter time. It's not that brown or tan color. It's actually more of a nice yellow gold color in the winter time during dormancy. Then also buffalo grass is a grass that you may not be familiar with. Very low input, similar to fine fescue in terms of its texture. Very slow growing as well. And this is what it looks like. And we also have in-depth trials looking at that as well. And so again, 2 options for warm season lawns as well. So I'll leave you with this slide. So I'll leave you with, here's our information for zoysia grass and buffalo grass, but I'll leave you with this slide. And then, some of the other slides that are after this that we don't have time for today are just basically summary points of what we talked about today. But one of the things that's important as master gardeners, I believe, is that you share the information that has been produced by VCE when you're discussing the things that we talked about today. So a lot of folks just aren't aware of which grasses or which practices are best for their lawns. So we have put out, Dr. Goatley and his colleagues and the VCE folks have put out a list of recommended varieties of either tall fescue or Bermuda grasses or different warm and cool season turfgrass varieties in this publication. You can find all of these at that website there underneath the title on the VCE website. It also has lawn care calendars. You see there in the middle, information for fertilizing both warm and cool season grasses, information of how to conduct a soil test. You'll be surprised a lot of folks don't understand the importance of conducting a soil test. That really plays a role in terms of your fertilizer requirements. And also the final document there in the bottom right, different urban nutrient management handbook. It's over 200 pages, I believe. This talks a lot about lawn care practices and this impact on smart lawn care practices and their impact and importance in preserving our water and environment here in Virginia. So with that, these are all just some summary points from what we talked about earlier. You see a number of references that we talked about today if you want to follow up and look at any of those studies. And I will take any questions you have. I thank you for your time. We got about 4 minutes if you have any questions.
Yes, we have a question from Irvin. Irvin wants to know if buffalo grasses grow well in the Piedmont region of Virginia.
I'm not really familiar with my regions of Virginia yet. So can you explain maybe where that would be?
Piedmont kind of goes in the middle of the state, north to south, east of the mountains, but kind of west of the fall line that runs a little bit around 95.
Right. So buffalo grass, and we can go back. We have a few minutes. It is a warm season grass, and so it's really going to thrive in the warm season environment. It's not necessarily going to. I mean, it's a perennial. It's a perennial grass, and so it'll just be dormant in periods of non-active growth. It is a native turfgrass species, which is something that a lot of people really like, and it spreads laterally via stolons. So just similar to like Bermuda grasses and zoysia grass, so has that spreading growth habit. Very great drought tolerance, very low fertilization or mowing requirements. The only thing it really doesn't do well is it just doesn't do shade very well, or repetitive traffic or wear. So if you wanted to use this on a lawn, if you have pets or kids, wouldn't be ideal. And also if you had really saline, sources of water or soil conditions. But based upon where you're at in the Piedmont, if you have really good warm temperatures, conducive for a good period of active growth of buffalo grass, I'd say go ahead and try it out. But it will be dormant in the wintertime under extreme cold conditions, so just like all of our other warm season grasses.
All right, that was our last question that I saw in the window. We've got 2 minutes left. If you want to ask a question of Dr. Sandor, let's get those in real quick. And so now everybody wants to take a quick break before the 2:30 session, general session with Dr. Scoggins.
If you have a question about anything, it doesn't have to be about some of the stuff we talked about today. But
all righty, we're not seeing any coming in. Dr. Sandor has his email address on the screen there. If you were shy and wanted to ask a question but afraid to put it in the question answer, you can send him an email, and I'm sure he would be glad to answer that individual question for you. This time, I'm going to end up closing up our room. So thank you, Dr. Sandor, for your wonderful presentation today on turfgrass and perceptions. And we'll see everybody at the general session at 2:30.
Thanks, everybody.